In this lesson, we're going to be talking about inverse functions. So I went ahead and wrote on the board this function here, which is y equals 2x minus 1. Once again, it's just as a as a part of review, if you remember, a function is a term that gives us a one-to-one. I put in one value for x, I get exactly one value for y. When I go ahead and put in some values here, if I put in 2 for x, I'll get 2 times x, which is 2x, or 2 times 2, and that's 4. 4 minus 1 is 3. I do the same thing with 4. 4 times 2 is 8, minus 1 is 7. I do it again with 6 and get 11. Now the inverse function would be if I were to be able to put in a 3, I should get a 2. If you'll notice here, if I put a 3 as it is right now in for x, unfortunately I get 3 times 2, which is 6 minus 1, not the other way around. So if I could use an inverse function of this number down here, this equation down here, which I'll get to in just a moment how we got to that, would be y equals 1/2 of x plus 1/2. This is going to give me inverse functions. So when I put in a 3, like I did here, I am going to end up with a 2, like I did here. This is an opposite function. It goes backwards. So if I put in a 3, 3 times 2, right here, I'm sorry, on this one, 3 times 1/2, which would be 3 halves, plus 1/2, 3 halves plus 1/2 is 4 halves, which is 2. So this allows me to go, this one gives me, every time I put a 2, I get a 3, I put a 4, I get a 7, I put a 6, I get 11. This one lets me go the other way and says, when I put a 3 in, I get a 2, I put a 7, I get a 4, and when I put a 11, I get a 6. The way I get an inverse function by itself is pretty easy on the steps. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite my original equation, and I start solving it for x instead. So I added 1 to both sides, giving me y plus 1 equals 2x. Then I go ahead, after I have the constant set up by itself, I went ahead and rewrote it as the x is on the left-hand side, just so that we understand that what we're doing here. 2x equals y plus 1. I divide everything by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. Y over 2 is 1/2 of y, and 1 over 2 is 1/2. Now, this is where the confusing part is. I will go ahead and swap x and y's values. In other words, the x becomes y and the y becomes x. That gives me the inverse function. Once I have this inverse function, I can go ahead and find out the opposite direction. Now, once again, I could have just started here and said, well, when x is 3, and instead I could put that in for y, but it's a lot more difficult. It's a lot easier to go ahead and use my inverse function to solve this.